Now is Jonathan Tobin, Editor-in-Chief of JNS News and creator of Think Twice with Jonathan Tobin. Thank you so much for your time. What do you make of President Trump there? Of course, the US Navy is blockading the Strait of Hormuz as of today. How is this going to go?
Well, we don't know what the ultimate outcome will be. But what we do know is that Trump is doing something different from all of his predecessors of the last 30 years. The goal of stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons, restraining its terrorism, has been shared by every American administration, Republican and Democrat. But what Trump is doing is not backing down when Iran says no in negotiations. That's happened time and again, especially under the Obama administration, when it agreed to the disastrous, weak Iran nuclear deal. Trump is saying, no, you're going to agree to my terms or something close to it, or you're going to know or we're going to know the reason why. And he's not just blockading the Iranian ports, in the Strait of Hormuz. He is setting the conditions for really altering the balance by, setting up a situation where more oil will not flow through the Straits of Hormuz in the future. That's a real blow to Iran, something for them to think about as they stick to their, ideological position, which is war with the West, war with America, great Satan, little Satan, Israel. It's not clear that they can ever agree to a reasonable deal on any of these issues. But Trump isn't going to back down, and that's something different and I think positive.
So it's getting Iran to agree to something reasonable. Of course, the peace talks in Pakistan failed to deliver a result over the weekend. What does this mean for future peace talks? I mean, how many talks do you think is it going to take to get somewhere, or, of course, more military action?
I think it's obviously going to need more military action because Iran's stance in the negotiations was, as I said before, the same thing they did with Obama, with Biden, with every American president going back, decades. They're just gonna, string them along, try to run out the clock, delay, prevaricate. Trump is having none of it. He's given them an offer several times, an exit ramp. People talk about him not having an exit ramp. He has offered them exit ramps. They have steadfastly refused to take them because this, for them, is not merely a policy position. It's related to their, fanatic religious beliefs, which are integral to a theocratic regime. The only thing that is going to convince them, if anything can, is taking strong action. That's what Trump has done by launching strikes to really destroy much of their military and their facilities for making weapons. And now he's doing the same thing with this blockade, which sort of turns what they thought was a winning card in their hands by stopping the flow of oil. He's turning it around and he's saying, okay, try us. You think that we have no ability to do this or to withstand a shift in the flow of oil? Maybe you're the ones who have miscalculated, not the American administration.
It's an interesting point because much of the media seem to point the finger at Donald Trump for miscalculating. Maybe that's incorrect. I'm going to get to the media in just a moment, but I want to talk about NATO allies. In your column, unlike Israel, many of America's NATO allies aren't really allies. You wrote that right now Washington and Jerusalem both have only one reliable ally, each other. Can you just expand on some of that for us?
Yeah, it's really clear that especially the Western European nations, America's traditional allies, Britain, France, and now even Italy and Spain, they are not proving to be allies in any way. I mean, it's not a question of them even contributing forces to the strikes on Iran. They wouldn't even let America use their airspace, some of them, to fly over, to send supplies to continue this struggle, which is to defend their interests and defend them. Iran's missiles can reach Europe. We've already seen that. Their war, again, is against the West, not just the United States or just against Israel. And instead of supporting or at least, providing some help, even the most, tacit, and where they would really have to do nothing, they've chosen to virtue signal their distaste for Trump
Yeah.
and their animus towards America. That's not what an ally does. And without the United States, NATO is nothing. NATO served a great purpose during the Cold War. It has sought a purpose since the fall of the Berlin Wall by really betraying the United States in this way, in a conflict against a dangerous Islamist foe which threatens the West. They're the ones who have called into question the future of the alliance, when at a time when, clearly, as I wrote, the only ally that the United States can count on in the Middle East to stand shoulder to shoulder, fight side by side for mutual interests is Israel. They've stepped up to the plate. The Europeans have not, and that's a real problem for the future of NATO.
Yeah, it certainly is. Look, it's interesting. We hear so much noise against President Trump, against the war, against the Iranian regime. But according to a new CBS News YouGov poll, Americans overwhelmingly support Trump's goals in this war.
As for, the aspirations, Americans broadly support them. 87% say Strait of Hormuz needs to be reopened. 81% want to ensure freedom for the Iranian people. 76% want to permanently stop Iran's nuclear program. 55% want the current leaders ousted before we end the war.
Yeah, that's most people want to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon.
It all depends on how you ask the question when it comes to polls. If you ask people, Americans, do you want to go to war against Iran and engage in a foreign adventure? Well, the majority of them will say no. But if you ask them, do you want to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? They say, of course we want to stop them. It's very manipulative. And we all know that that's how politicians and some of our colleagues in the media play this game. The trouble is, most of the critiques of the current war against Iran in the American media, and indeed even from some politicians, is just about politics.
Yeah.
They don't like Iran. They don't like Trump far more than they don't like the Islamists of Iran. The New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, he said the quiet part out loud this past week when he said, he knows Iran is really bad, but he doesn't want the United States to win this conflict against Iran because he hates Trump.
Yeah.
He's just saying the quiet part out loud. That's what most of Trump's critics are saying. It's deeply unpatriotic and against the interests of the country. But in an era where I guess, and I think it's axiomatic that politics plays the role that religion used to play in most people's lives. If you don't like Trump, that's the most important thing, not defense of our values, democracy, or the threat that Iran poses to the world.
Yeah, and we saw that because on day one, I think when Ayatollah Khamenei was taken out, there was outrage against President Trump, so much fake news being circulated. You mentioned Thomas Friedman there. This is the New York Times foreign affairs columnist, Thomas Friedman. He went on CNN. Here's the first part of what he had to say.
Yeah, I find myself, Michael, in a situation where I really want to see Iran defeated militarily, because this regime is a terrible regime for its people in the region, and nothing would improve the region more than the replacement of this regime with a regime in Iran that was focused on enabling its people to realize their full potential and integrating peacefully with other countries. And
Okay, so he's making the point. He wants to see Iran defeated, but then he says this.
the problem is, I really don't want to see Bibi Netanyahu or Donald Trump politically strengthened by this war, because they are two awful human beings. They're both engaged in anti-democratic projects in their own countries. They're both alleged crooks. They are terrible, terrible people doing terrible things to America's standing in the world and Israel's standing in the world. And so I really find myself torn. I want to see Iran militarily defeated, but I do not want to see these two terrible people strengthened.
As you say, Jonathan, really saying the quiet part out loud there. So I think he's just one example of so many people who don't like Netanyahu and they don't like Donald Trump, and that's clouding their judgment when it comes to this war.
I mean, it's determining their judgment. I mean, let's be honest here. There's so much wrong in what he just said. Neither Trump nor Netanyahu are engaged in anti-democratic projects. What they are doing is is that they have won elections. It's their opponents that are trying to, topple democratically elected governments.
Correct.
It's just a talking point for their partisan opponents. You can dislike Donald Trump, you can dislike Benjamin Netanyahu, but to prioritize, this partisan project against them over a conflict against an existential foe like Iran is just so irresponsible. And listen, people like Friedman, who have been preaching that Israel should, surrender territory in the vain hope that Palestinians who want to destroy Israel will somehow make peace. He has been wrong about everything in foreign policy for the last 40 years. I mean, it's an astonishing. His career is as long as Netanyahu's is. Netanyahu's been around forever in Israeli politics, which is one of the reasons why people, are sick of him, some of them, in Israel. But, Friedman has been wrong about everything. He's just like the rest of the foreign policy establishment in the United States and Europe. They preach the same failed ideas. They don't get it. They don't know what time it is. And in the end, they just prioritize their own status and their own political machinations over the interests that they're supposed to be supporting and defending. These are the so-called experts. They're always wrong. Trump's greatest strength is that he doesn't trust them.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. Jonathan Tobin, Editor-in-Chief of JNS News and creator of Think Twice with Jonathan Tobin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.